Morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
We have big problems to solve today. And we're not going to solve it, but we have big problems to help people think through how to be a good citizen today, especially on stuff that they don't have a direct role on. They're just not going to be able to have maybe somebody's best friends with the president, but most of our listeners won't be best friends with the Secretary of State. So how do they indirectly be a good citizen on major global issues? I assume you saw the topic today, Professor.
Uh, no, but was it something about America's role? I'm reading it now. America's role in the world.
Yeah, specifically with authoritarian
Yeah.
dictatorship, totalitarian countries. I named four of them, and I'm not sure that's all four of them. I think a lot of countries are pretty totalitarian. I just don't know them, in Africa or Asia or somewhere. But I mean Iran, and I would like to talk a little bit about Iran, not as a subject matter expertise of whether we should be there or not. I think they could listen to Professor Herr for, read that article that you and I both liked. If they want to get some really good insights from a historian on Iran, I think Professor Herr is probably a better expert than you, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not. Are you an
Yeah.
expert on Iran?
No, no, no. And
Yeah,
and even he would concede that uh, there are other specific experts on Iran that even he defers to. I mean,
of course.
always
But
more,
we
there's
actually,
always another expert.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly. We know him, or you know
yeah.
him, and I know of him. And so I don't mean I'm not trying to mine you for your expertise in Iran, or China. Maybe a little bit on Russia though, because you do have a little bit of expertise in Russia. And North Korea we can mostly ignore, but they're a dangerous nuclear regime. So, please feel to throw that in. And I don't know if we need to talk about Orban and Hungary. I don't think that's quite authoritarian enough. I'd like to know what your perspective is of a U.S. historian
Hmm.
on what our role in the world is. Should we be taking out Iran when we can? And should we be taking out China when we can? And Russia, yeah, we should be taking out Russia when we can. Or no, give big picture
Well,
on
the biggest
our
picture,
role.
and where I almost always start with any seminar, and is to remind Americans of our older foreign policy tradition. We actually had a pretty coherent foreign policy tradition in the United States that was, of course, influenced and interrupted by the Civil War. But basically, the pre-Wilsonian American foreign policy consensus was that the United States always needed to be prepared to act unilaterally, and we needed to always keep in mind that the most important thing we did um, was to serve as an example that human beings could govern themselves. So we usually begin with these kind of twin pillars of unilateralism and American exceptionalism, properly understood, as we always say. And then
So
uh,
wait, can I interrupt you there, or are you on a theme? And
well,
then I'll
I
interrupt.
mean, I'll just get through
Okay,
you asked for
go
the
ahead.
basics. So unilateralism, and American exceptionalism, and then what that means is that our foreign policy, in terms of when we act, which is what you're talking about, not just with
Yeah,
dictatorships, but in all cases, it needs to be a combination of ideals and interests. And if something, it has to be both. That if something is in keeping with our ideals, but we have no interest there, then we do not act. And if something is in keeping with our interests, but it's in conflict with our ideals, we do not act. And we only act when something is in both our ideals and our interests. And the president who understood this the best, but he was always misunderstood as a Wilsonian idealist, was probably the combination of George W. Bush, and Dick Cheney, who tried to articulate that vision, but people, because of the power of the I don't know, historical pull of Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt and the post World War II order, people have a hard time resetting back to the what the foreign policy consensus was before Wilson. So anytime anybody starts talking about ideals, they start calling them Wilsonian, And anytime somebody starts talking about interests, they start calling them a neocon or a neoliberal. Whereas there are people who understood that the tradition is that both of those things were required in order to have American action.
Okay,
Um,
so that's a really nice big framework. I do want to delve into at least two of those, maybe four major points, I guess. Do you have a preference on where we go? Do you want to keep going on or do you mind if I
no,
ask a
hit
question?
me. What are you most interested in?
Well, I'm interested in a lot, but let's kind of go to the Iran model just a little bit. Not expertise in war and even the current events. Actually, I do care. I guess if you want to explain, you can. But I'm more interested is when there is a really dangerous person or group of people or even culture, and I'm not sure in Iran's instance whether it's a person, a group of people, a theocracy, or a whole culture of people that don't like Western values. I don't know yet. I maybe you know, but they're pretty dangerous, or at least they say they're dangerous to the United States for 40 years, 40 plus years since I was a little kid with Carter. And then Reagan came along. But they've been dangerous ever since they took over the embassy and before. That's why the Shah was there. So that we have a dangerous country. That's the interest, I guess, is oil and oil related. I don't know. The principle is, well, wait, they're scary and they might kill us. Or no, John, you're missing the point altogether. It's
The nature of the danger changes in the modern world. And this is again something that I really wish people would take I keep going back to this, the Bush presidency more seriously. Uh, because
Everybody hates the Bush presidency. Liberal, Trumpies, conservative. Well, I don't know if conservatives do, but liberals hate him and
yeah,
Trumpies hate
everybody
him.
hates it and misunderstands it. And actually, we could have Stephen Knott back on here to talk about his really excellent book called Rush to Judgment, which he wasn't necessarily a fan of the Bush administration. He just realized that so much of the criticism of it was wrong. And just based on, you know, incorrect reporting and incorrect assumptions about policy directions.
But you're saying if a citizen, me,
Yeah,
were to
but
read this
so,
book, I
but
would have a better understanding whether we should be in Iran or not.
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
But here's the difference. Well, there are a couple of differences, but you can't underestimate how important it is that the Bush administration really sought the best advice from people of the absolute highest character, and that they were trying really hard to do the right thing. Uh, and I don't think you can make that same assumption with the Trump administration.
Yeah,
Um,
that's an
it,
important
it's
distinction. So
not a
thanks for
gathering
noting.
of it's not and it's not a gathering of the greatest minds in America and also challenged by the greatest minds in America. I mean, one of the things that Bush did that I really admired was that he had his advisors, but then every so often he would call in a group of advisors and historians and intellectuals just to critique what he was doing and say, tell me where I'm wrong, tell me the mistakes that I'm making, and he would call these people in specifically to criticize him. So
Is
he
this 41 or 40? Gosh, I
W.
lose.
Bush, W. Bush.
Okay.
This I'm talking about during the Iraq War. Uh,
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
yeah, the second Iraq War,
Right.
uh, and Um, and so he was benefiting not just from the expertise of people with a long history in the region and in diplomacy and in government, but he was also benefiting from the criticism of his policies as well.
You're talking President 43. Isn't he the one that everyone made fun of for lack of intellect or a lack of a
Yeah,
interesting? And you're saying
that's
that's misunderstood. That's a
absolutely
mistake.
wrong. Yes.
I'm really glad we had this conversation. Okay.
Yeah, he was.
Back
I mean, I don't know that I would call many of our presidents geniuses. So I think
right.
that's the standard. But he was incredibly bright, and he was trying to do the right thing, and he wasn't intimidated or afraid of asking hard questions of the smartest people in America.
even if they disagreed. Okay, get me back to Iran though.
So getting back to Iran, what I mean by that is that the nature of the threat has changed in that when you're dealing with a country that is less powerful, the threat is always from terrorism because that's how a
Mhm,
less powerful country can harm a bigger country. And it's impossible to shield yourself from every potential act of terrorism, just
mhm.
because a lone actor with a gun can do a lot of damage, and a lone actor with a bomb can do a lot of damage. But when the nature of that threat changes, it becomes a regional threat and then has the potential to actually becoming a national security threat. And there are a couple of ways in which the war in Ukraine probably changed the equation as well, because Iran was getting really good at building their Shahed drones. And for the same reason, Ukraine is getting really good and is at shooting them down. There is no substitute for experience and mass production. Making a lot of things, you improve them along with improving the production techniques. And in addition to Iran continuing to want a nuclear weapon, and continuing to support terrorists, which they had done. They were the technological advances they were making in terms of drones was um, was also making them a bigger regional threat. Factor in also how much more susceptible the United States has been to Iranian misinformation campaigns. It's so much easier to influence American public opinion via TikTok and social media that, and you'd have to say that Iran, along with Russia and China, are absolutely the most sophisticated in terms of putting misinformation into the American political consciousness. I can't tell you how often um, my students who don't pay attention to politics very much at all, but often when they do have questions, what the questions they ask me are often prompted by accounts that that I would trace back to um, either Iran, China, or Russia. Um, so even if we don't think this stuff is penetrating to the sort of intellectuals or at the highest level, you need to realize that they're doing real damage in terms of their misinformation campaigns. So you take the intelligence piece, you take the terrorism piece, you take the support for um, 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 militias and groups that are destabilizing in the region, the the drones, the nuclear weapons, um, and it means that we're not facing the same threat from Iran in the year 2026 that we were in 1986.
Okay, I think that's a helpful analysis. I think, and Jeffrey Herf had a lot of those kind of points, didn't he? Except for that you
Yeah.
didn't emphasize the intellectual, sorry, what misinformation campaigns. But is that your stuff, or have you read some good articles on that?
I mean, we're all reading, hopefully, smart people and
Yeah, that's true.
repeating
Okay.
what other smart people are saying.
Well,
Yeah.
so the answer is we. I don't. I'm not trying to pin you down on the war and get into contemporary events, but historically, the United States interests, both in our ideals and our what's our interest in Iran?
Well, I would say our interest in Iran are really making sure that they don't develop a weapon capable of hitting the United States directly, because they do act through terrorist proxies or acting directly as terrorists. And if they were to get a nuclear device capable of hitting Israel, for instance, or give it to one of their proxy groups to have them do it. Um,
So
even
how about timing? Do we care about the timing, whether it's 1 month, 1 year, or 10 years?
Well, in all these cases, I guess the other thing that is lacking is the public education piece. Because even if that information is incorrect or partial, um, and even if the news media ignores it, an administration does have we have a representative form of government, and an administration does have a duty and a responsibility to communicate um, without compromising, military effectiveness, but um, the broad scope of American foreign policy, but also why we are doing a thing at a particular time. And we haven't, we've seen a lot of different answers from the administration and not really a coherent one. But
So you're frustrated on the process stuff, but the big picture historical approach,
well,
we
I
do
mean,
have
we might find out that the timing was simply that the Israelis had intelligence that these people were going to be all in the same room, and this was a good time to strike. You know, so the timing might have been dictated by a piece of intel that they can't describe, and and that this does also happen in history. We should all be prepared to be a little bit humble and find out 20 years from now that the it wasn't planned, that this was an opportunity and thus they didn't have the time to do a sort of public information campaign. I, I'm skeptical because of how many military forces were moved into the region beforehand.
right, right.
But who knows? The archives make fools of us all when they finally open because we're all just trying to guess as to
Yeah.
what's
Okay,
going
well, I'll accept that, I think. So our ideals in our, you keep seeing,
Our ideals, yeah. Well, we certainly it is in keeping with American ideals that a regime, they're not a regime that has any qualities that need to be encouraged by the United States. So there's nothing in conflict with our ideals really about this is not a representative democracy that respects individual human rights and um, it's these are these are the I don't know how you'd rank it, but it's one of the worst countries on earth in
yeah.
terms of their government. So one of the
So
worst governments on
it
earth, I should say.
it's the opposite of an example of people proving that they can govern themselves.
Yeah, right. But at the same time, if they weren't, you know, if they were keeping to themselves, um, we wouldn't necessarily have any interest in um, undermining their government or attacking their leadership.
Because we have enough oil from other friendly actors in the area and
Well,
around the
oil
world.
is really a secondary issue for
Is
the.
it? Come on, Professor. Of course, energy is like the number one most important thing next to air and water that the human species needs to survive. So it is a strategic interest of America and every other country to protect energy supplies.
It is in the strategic interest of the entire world to protect energy supplies, but there's really no reason why that has to be oil from Iran. I mean, we get enough oil from
Our
other
own,
places in the Persian Gulf region and from other places in the world, and frankly, from the United States.
right?
And in addition to that, we've also done this to ourselves by not encouraging the spread of peaceful nuclear power, which could be making sure that we had, reduced CO2, but also, make it possible to have uh, plenty of petroleum reserves now into the future.
Let's hold that for another day, but that's a worthwhile discussion. Maybe we should have a history on energy.
There's just
Uh,
no reason to have an energy shortage anywhere in the world.
yeah.
How's that for a blanket statement?
Yeah, but it might be worth a whole topic on another day. Okay, so there are other authoritarian regimes in the area, but we seem to be friendly with them. And it's because they don't, because we're friendly with them. We don't need to
Hmm.
invade a friendly country, right? Is that I mean, what's the distinction between another dictatorship in that exact region? And there's several
Yeah.
monarchies. So
Ideals and interests. Again, if it's not in, it, if it isn't in keeping with our ideals and our interests, we just leave them alone. We cannot, it's not our job to, I mean, this is and that's the Wilsonian change. That's the thing that Woodrow Wilson really introduced was the idea that it can be, that somehow our ideals were our interests and that we could and should um, impose regimes around the world, and that
well, but Professor, I think I understand your critique of that, of President Wilson, but you have a Tutolian philosophy that every country that is peaceful and prosperous and free is an advantage to America, and we should be excited and thankful for that.
no, well, that's not my philosophy. That was the philosophy of the people who renamed the War Department the Defense Department in the first place. To understand that, I mean
You
that
mean to Department of Defense?
that yeah, yeah, that we don't really need in a world where other nations are safe and prosperous and free, that makes us safer because countries that are safe and prosperous and free don't have anything to fear from one another. Um, but you know,
Well, wait,
that's
wait,
not my theory. That's just called collective security. That's
but did somebody write a book or somebody give a speech or
lots of, I mean, I guess you could say it was the original idea behind, NATO or the UN Charter, or I mean, well, at least part of the motivation behind part of the motivation behind the original idea of the United Nations.
okay,
Um,
so we've got to where almost my final big question, and then we can do Q&A. Um, we there's lots we're missing, but I am confused or concerned or have a what is that angst. Everything that I was born from through 59 years and lots of military tradition and lots of institutional traditions had this world order. And I know we don't like to say world order because that seems conspiratorial or the Rothschilds or Rockefellers or something. But there was the United States set up a system after World War II and we established it and it's ours. We funded it, we paid for it, much of it, and we planted our flag and did United Nations and did NATO and align with us and we'll protect you. And that world order made sense to me. And it seems like it's not only fraying, but it seems like it's disappearing on us. And I don't know, maybe it's too early to make those predictions. Maybe we have to wait 20 years, but it sure seems like we're living in a different world right now than from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Talk to us about that.
well, and I would just say we've had three presidents in a row who have not really supported that foreign policy vision. So, of course, I mean, I think a lot of people voted for President Biden on the idea that he was going to restore it. Certainly, I think a lot of Biden voters had hoped because he had a long history in the Senate of supporting that general foreign policy consensus that you're talking about. But uh,
Well, how did Obama and Biden distract and diminish it to set up Trump then? I'm not, I lived through this, but I don't quite get your point yet.
well, I mean, for the most part, Obama's uh, biggest problem was simply his inexperience. I mean, this is somebody who had been
Right.
he'd been a senator for a year,
Right.
and the main thing he did when he was in the U.S. Senate was run for president, and he had only been a state legislator before that.
Right.
He was a bright person, but he had no experience at all in uh, or knowledge of American foreign policy or American
Well, but how
military
did he
policy.
abandon the UN and NATO? And I mean, he was doing TPP. I mean, he was trying to get the alignment of the Asian countries together for trading that uh, Trump got rid of. I mean, it seemed like that would be the same kind of order. So I'm still not following you.
Somewhat, but he was also the person who didn't seem to understand the value of American credibility, and he discounted the previous experiences of other administrations in dealing, in particular, with places like Russia or uh, or the Middle East.
Now, are you talking like
Iran,
just
for, I mean, I actually in dealing with these countries, Iran, China, Russia, North Korea, in every one of these cases, the administration, I mean, I'm not sure if you remember during the debates with Mitt Romney, but when Mitt Romney said that Russia was was a potential threat, um, Obama said, the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back. Like, you old fogey, what are you talking about? And
rings a bell?
calling for a reset. Yeah, and he wanted a reset in every one of these areas because he thought that, I mean, I don't mean to sound too uncharitable, but President Obama believed a lot of bad stories about American foreign policy and didn't
So,
really believe, and he surrounded himself with a lot of people who were critical of American foreign policy actions in the past. And he thought that he and his advisors we're going to reset all this stuff and look at it with fresh eyes. And he discounted the experiences of many of the people who came before him. And it
so
led,
you're saying it's not just a personality style, the Obama apology world tour he went on that made a
that,
lot
well,
of people mad.
I mean, I think those were all symptoms.
Yeah, symptoms.
Yeah.
But you're saying he's more will I'm trying to follow you. More Wilsonian, that he had this whatever this ideal is that is impractical.
No, I think his foreign policy was incoherent and amateurish. It's the foreign policy, I mean it both ways when I say that Trump is dumb Obama.
Yeah.
Imagine somebody who doesn't know anything about foreign policy, but they're kind of smart, and that's Obama.
Okay,
Imagine
so it's the same
someone who
critique.
doesn't
It's
know
just
anything about foreign policy, but they're kind of dumb, and that's Trump.
yeah, same critique. And then Biden could have done something, but he was too old or
Well,
didn't.
and the other thing was that we found that Biden was so captured by the left wing of his party, and in many cases ended up supporting policies of his administration and especially in foreign policy. I mean, there's a, we really need to listen to Alex Cranberg on this point about exactly what it was like to be a businessman dealing with foreign countries when the Biden administration was in office. And I don't even necessarily think that it was Joe Biden himself.
Right, right.
But it was these were things that Biden approved of, ostensibly, as president. But the policies at the ground level that were taken during the Biden administrations in foreign policy and in domestic policy were far more radical than anything anyone was expecting.
But but isn't most of Alex's thoughts on the kind of the social issues of abortion and gays and
Yeah.
trans and prayer and the evils of Western society or
I I mean, and to put it another way, there are people who thought that Jimmy Carter was a good foreign policy president. It's like they thought that Carter was the example we should have followed, and they're just wrong. I mean, the whole, and it's got a nice name, Carter's human rights policy. But what those policies, and this is why you have to explain this stuff to the American people. You need a general policy that rewards friends and punishes enemies, not a foreign policy that rewards enemies and punishes friends. Because we don't get to micromanage and nor should we want to micromanage the internal politics of other countries. We have to allow them to, and especially if they are emerging representative governments, um, they get
Otherwise, it get kicked out of
evolved
office.
according to their own representative institutions, you
Yeah,
know,
the
and
culture of that country is something, and if they don't go along with that culture, they'll get kicked out and have a dictatorship or something. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That we need to, it's, and in a way, it's not trusting democracy to work over the long term in other countries.
My analogy on that, so tell me if I'm wrong, is our own system of federalism. We have
Yeah.
50 state experiments, and we should allow them to be crazy
Yeah.
or conservative
Of
or
course,
liberal.
we're
And
always going to feel this like tension of like, hey, you're doing it wrong, Mississippi.
right.
Let's step in and fix it, right? But I th I think we've seen that in so many ways, like a lot of the policies, like California education policies that spread throughout the country, did real damage to the rest of the country. And
Okay.
but federalism allows people to push back on that, you know, and
Yeah.
in
And
its own
forgive me
way,
for,
foreign policies works the same way.
yeah, thanks. We're on the same page. And forgive me for steering us back, if I can. So the last three presidents, you say, haven't done a great job in executing what we did since World War II. So what we need to do, I mean, we had 85 years of experience, 75, 85 years of experience of being a global influencer for good. And it seems like our allies are fraying and our enemies may be emboldened, or maybe they're not. I don't know. So I don't know whether to keep on NATO for a little bit, or the European Union, or United Nations, or whether I need to transition over to, are we going to stick with our allies in Japan? And should we be
Well,
worried
I
about
mean,
China?
if I was to say anything like positive about the Trump administration, is that you know, it's we're kicking the training wheels out, you know, that um, that we are flirting with what does the world look like if the United States of America is not acting like a world power, which is a strange thing to say given how many recent wars we've had, but like, and that we're in right now, but I should say acting like a world power in the American tradition. How about that? Um,
That's like the worst compliment you've ever given anybody. That was like an insult extraordinaire. Um,
Well, but we're about to find out, you know, how strong democracy is in Poland, you know.
right.
And we're going to find out how Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia and Finland and Norway and uh,
Well, wait, are you predicting war, and expanded war in Europe?
I only if those countries can't, um, uh, you know, provide enough of a uh, united front against potential Russian aggression.
You mean deterrence? They either got to deter it or they're going to fight.
Well, you know, you can't really stop, you know, Putin doesn't follow logic, you know, like, so you couldn't stop an attack, you know, from happening, you know, it was just like, you know, like I said, just like a terrorist, you can't prevent all terrorist attacks from happening, but what you can do is minimize the risk. So, you know, Poland, um, you know, they could do everything right and Russia might still attack them. You know,
Right.
but they can they can do things to try to disincentivize Russia from attacking them. You know.
Let me ask it again. Well, no, let's. We haven't talked China and Japan and that part of the world at all.
Mm,
So Iran has a huge historic history. I think going back, I don't know, hundreds of years, thousands of years. China certainly does. Um, I know there's different elements of China, but that part of the world is not just a third world country. It's got a long storied history.
mm,
So they've got nukes. They're pretty dangerous. They're an authoritarian regime, and then their little kid brother or weird, North Korea. God, I mean, yikes, whatever that country is. So we have interests and we have ideals, but they're just too powerful because they have nukes and they're dangerous, too much population in China and nukes, and yikes. So we're going to let them control that area of the world, or goodbye, Japan. And I don't mean to be so doom and gloomish, but from a historical perspective, where is our role in Asia? Are we abandoning that kind of?
Well, our policy towards China needs to be something like what our policy towards Russia was during the Cold War. That what we need is clear lines communicated to China that um, here's the line, and if you actually cross this line, it means you're going to war with us. You know,
And that's Taiwan.
yeah, and that would be one of them, right? And Japan is another, and South Korea is another. Like that our security guarantees to some of these places, New Zealand, Australia, right? These are ironclad. And and then in terms
So
of,
is there a change in the Trump administration on that or not? Where have
I
we?
have no idea.
I know, isn't that scary though that we don't have any idea?
Yeah, I don't know. Um, I
Does
know
anyone?
that I know that Marco Rub. I'm pretty sure that Marco Rubio, and in some ways we could just talk about Marco Rubio because um, he is someone who has coherent thoughts and is capable of communicating them for the most part.
Yeah, he is.
So
Still not my favorite. I know you really like him, but I concur. He is a strategic thinker and he's
I don't
intellectually.
know if I want to say I really like him. I liked him as a young politician rising up,
Yeah,
recognizing him as a person of talent, but I have been disappointed in many of the things he said and done over the past 15-ish years. That being said, I do recognize that he is someone who has taken U.S. foreign policy seriously at the
agreed.
highest level for decades.
Agreed.
You can't say that he hasn't been thinking about this. He's been
Agreed.
thinking about it, talking about it, and writing about it for decades. So
Agreed.
um, so he is the closest thing to a coherent um, U.S. foreign policy. And, he's Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, so you could
Yep.
say um, he is, under the direction of the president directing him.
So, Professor, I was a minor cog, and I mean that really minor cog in the national security apparatus. My work in Eastern Europe as a National Guardsman in Eastern Europe. Isn't that interesting? We used to do that. So, tiny, tiny, tiny little cog. My experience meeting with a variety of ambassadors over the decades is that we have tens of thousands of smart people in our government, current and out, and depending on administration, but professional diplomatic corps, Secretary of State's and department. It's just thousands, tens of thousands of experienced, smart people that have been working for our government for decades. So I kind of have a confidence in the system that those people are still around. They didn't just retire and go off to Tahiti. They're still around. So at a certain point, are we going to get back to where we were in the 50s, 60s, 70s? Or we are on a new uncharted territory. It's not retrievable. We are in a different world. Tell me that, and then let's go see if anybody else has any questions.
It's always retrievable. I mean, we, and let's not talk about the past as if it was an unbroken string of successes as well. I would say the Truman administration stumbled their way through, and eventually, by having most of the big ideas correct, eventually had close to a good policy. And it was really, I really think the Eisenhower administration is probably the only administration that came in with a coherent view of the Cold War, and they were able to execute it for the entire administration and demonstrate its success they're probably the only administration that you could say that about. Kennedy came in and bungled his way through. Johnson bungled his way through. God knows what Nixon was trying to do. Ford actually was probably, a missed opportunity. He was really pretty good in terms of most things in foreign policy, but who knows? Not president very long. Carter was a mess. generally speaking, had a lot of good ideas, but I don't know that he wasn't perfect in all respects either. Um, and then, the first Bush administration, I think, was pretty excellent in terms of foreign policy. Um, Maybe the four most successful years of American foreign policy in terms of managing the end of the Cold War and all of the difficulties that had come along with it. But, after the first Bush administration, there was just such a contempt for expertise. The idea and this is just something that happens. Um, we start thinking that the things that have created peace and prosperity in America must be really easy, and
Mhm.
therefore anybody can do this stuff. And let's get some fresh blood in there, And the Clinton administration, although they had, some good hard-headed people in there, and I would also say the Bill Clinton of his last 2 years in terms of foreign policy was different than the Bill Clinton of his first few years. Again, it's kind of like Obama in that he's a smart person and he wasn't afraid of smart people. And eventually he got some good advice, but, you know, he was learning on the job. And I still don't know that I'm I wasn't the biggest fan of Clinton's foreign policy, well, especially for the first few years. But it seemed like in his last couple of years, at least, it was coming towards some sort of consensus. But then George W. Bush, um, in some ways similar to Eisenhower, was the first president who came into office who had actually thrown some brain cells at coming up with what American foreign policy should be in the world. And then when the crisis of 9/11 happened, it happened within a framework of a foreign policy vision that had already been formed rather than, and yes, it certainly altered the equation, but he had already formulated his foreign policy vision before 9/11. Um, so um, he was applying the conditions of the world to an existing framework.
So I appreciate the kind of chronology through our presidents. That's helpful context. One last one, and be brief if you can. Yes, John, we should fight authoritarians whenever we rationally can, as long as it's within our interests. I know, ideally, we want peaceful, prosperous, and free countries around the world. So, yes, that's our ideal. And whenever there's somebody that's not, we'd rather have an alternative. We'd rather have regime change to have a peaceful, prosperous, and free country. Agree or disagree, Professor? Just on the ideal part
Um, there's something we're leaving out here, and that's that human beings die when we do these things. And so
of
I
that
would
point.
say let's also factor in, I love my kids a lot, and I would I would say before we undertake any decision, we need to evaluate the cost in human life to this decision, because in any military conflict, um, Americans are going to die and innocent people are going to die.
Yeah, I love that point, Professor, but it's interesting. I didn't actually, I may have implied it, but I didn't mean it necessarily of military and assassination. I meant it more of being the emblem, the bright light of freedom and love, and I want that. Kind of what Boris Yeltsin supposedly did in the grocery store in Texas. Oh my gosh, I want that. This is amazing. And then you say, let's give up the Russian dictatorship. Let's be like America. So I don't necessarily mean it just military. I mean soft powers as well. Is it we want non-authoritarians in government, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then we have to have their interest, though. If they're just nowhere in the middle of nowhere, it's not our job to go be the loving person. We're
But
not.
just our resources are limited,
Yeah.
and our focus is limited. There are enough dangerous people in the world that we need to stay focused on, that we can't really focus on people who are not dangerous to us.
Yeah, okay, I love that point too. Okay, excellent. Jeff or Bart, you get first bite of the apple. Who's going to take yourself off mute? Oh, come on, gentlemen, help me out. Bart, you're up.
Yeah. Okay, I turned myself off mute. I beat Jeff by a fraction of a second, probably. Um, yeah, all of this is really fascinating, and I think it's a little. What's a little frightening to me is looking at the history of the lack of experience of various presidents. Actually, most of the presidents that Stephen pointed out over the last, I guess, 40 or 50 years in foreign policy. And I think I kind of missed this in what you guys were talking about a minute ago, but I always thought that President H.W. Bush um, had probably more experience in foreign policy than a lot of these folks. And I don't know if you mentioned that or not. You may have. You probably did. Um, and I don't know. Yeah, it's a little frightening, because the current administration doesn't really have that much experience, although they probably have more experience than certainly Obama did with foreign policy, because Trump was in office, from 2017 to, 2021.
Bart, I've got a question for you
Yeah,
though.
yeah,
You and your more liberal friends, because I think you're fairly centered, but you and your more liberal friends, I know you have a lot of liberal friends, whether you admit to it or not.
yeah, yeah. No, I
You guys
do.
are really scared. You think the world's a mess, right? In foreign policy, you are scared. So why don't you ask that question to the professor? Is my guess accurate? A lot of people that are scared, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I think people who are more liberal right now, they're appalled and scared at the same time because they
Yeah.
really don't understand totally what's going on in the world right now. We haven't gotten you haven't gotten too specific in this conversation, but one of the questions that I constantly ask myself is, oh my God, I don't know. Iran is a country that has existed for like, I don't know, let's just say 5,000 years. That's probably more years than it has actually existed. But the current government is really not the government of a country. It's really a terrorist organization. And it's been fighting for the last 40 years various asymmetrical wars. I'm starting to sound like Tom Brasino here, but the war, people are upset like when the Israelis are blowing up various things in Iran. But what people need to understand right with that conflict right now is that's pretty much an asymmetrical war. The Israelis are trying to destroy as much stuff that the terrorist regime in Iran, and I shouldn't put it that way because people are going to go, oh no, that's a real government in Iran. Well, it really isn't a real government. It's a bunch of terrorists who, they're staying in power by opposing the United States and Israel. And that's what they've done for the last 50 years, so they have the big Satan and the little Satan. But it's like if you don't destroy their ability to use natural gas to produce electricity, you're not going to be able to defeat them. Because that's what they're doing. So that's why the Israelis yesterday and the day before hit that natural gas field off the coast, off the coast there in the Straits of Hormuz, unfortunately. But they had to do that. And I
So
know I'm probably getting much more specific here, but
no,
than
I
you
kind of
want.
want this conversation. I want people to understand why we might be there. So is that a comment for the professor to react to, or is it you also have a question?
It's more of a comment. It's more of a comment because I think the reason, I think Israel would have hit Iran right now if the United States had not been part of this. Because I think there was enough going on there to create a threat for them as well as an opportunity because the Iranians have no air defense right now at all. I think the Israelis would have done this anyway. I think the reason the United States is there, and I could be wrong about this, is because Iran had actually become a client state of China during this recent period of time.
Ah,
The reason we
so,
can't bring their internet back up is because their internet is Chinese internet. We don't know what the hell to do with it. You can't bring it up. You can't just. It's not like if Elon Musk was Starlink was in charge, he could just flip a switch and it would come back on. Well, the Chinese have an internet system that's impenetrable in China. They've given that to the Iranians, and the Iranians are using it. Well, of course they can turn it on and off whenever they want to, and we have no idea how to turn it back on. They're trying. I think they're trying to figure it out, but they don't really know. So
okay.
it's like, so I'm having trouble actually formulating a question on all this stuff.
But you tied it together with the other authoritarian country, and then you got Russia's involvement as well. So
Yes,
you got
absolutely.
you got this tripartite. Go back to axis of evil again. I mean,
Yeah.
everything changes and then it stays the same. Professor, give some reaction to Bart's comments.
I guess I don't disagree with anything Bart's saying. I would, yeah, the Iranian, they're the only reason why Iran isn't the worst is because North Korea exists. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
no, you can't get me to say anything nice about this current Iranian government. They are a terrorist organization at the top of a at the top of a country imposing their will on it.
Okay, so you guys have both dragged me into this question, and I didn't want to go there, but Jeff, get ready for your question. So we kind of need to find out how much nuclear material and what kind of centrifuges there are. We kind of need to get that, don't we?
No,
Ah, you want to both of you. Interesting. You want to back out. We want to declare victory and leave.
no, I just don't care.
Not me. Not
No,
me.
I'm not saying back out and leave. I'm saying I don't care. You
You
know,
don't care
Yeah.
about how much nuclear 60%,
it's the same.
really?
Again, I said the same thing about the Iraq War. Like when they said that we didn't find weapons of mass destruction, I was like, yeah, well, okay. That didn't bother me the way it seems to have bothered everyone else. And
So you're saying drones and information warfare are kind of on an equal footing with nuclear. They're all dangerous.
no, it's that they have an intention, and as long as they have an intention, it that they will continue to keep trying. And I don't really this game of trying to figure out how far along they are, and as if we could, with any kind of precision, know exactly how far along they are in their nuclear program. In
Well,
order
you
to
can
eliminate the threat, you have to eliminate the government that is seeking to acquire nuclear weapons for themselves.
but, but,
They are an
but,
illegitimate regime in every sense.
but Professor, between the three options of opening up the strait again, finding their nuclear stuff, and true, authentic regime change, all three of those are pretty tough. But the most difficult is the regime change. You have to have troops on the ground. I mean, tens of thousands of troops on the ground, hundreds of thousands of troops. You can't do regime change from the air. You might be able to figure out how to get the nuclear stuff out, actually find it, secure it, and take it out of the country.
Well, I don't know. These are all things that don't necessarily have, a perfect historical antecedent. Maybe we can do regime change from the air. Maybe we, I mean, I don't know what the Trump policy is, but if they had come out and said, well, we're not going to send any ground troops in, but what we're going to do is we're going to continue to kill anyone who claims to be the head of this government.
Just for years, for
Yeah,
months or years.
I mean, again, I don't know if that was their policy. At least it would be coherent and say, if you, so protesters, um, we're not going to send a single American man with a rifle there, but if you'd like to start some kind of a civil war, or overthrow this government, we will make sure that nobody from the previous regime is in charge of it. I,
Okay, so Professor, I had a dream, and that I don't want to use those words because it's not as insightful as I have a dream. But I did have a dream, and it was that we parachuted in. I want you to make fun of me, if you'd like. That we, United States, parachuted in 250,000 handguns and ammunition, lots of ammo for those 250,000 handguns, and said, "Here, Iranian citizen," and drop hundreds of thousands at the same time. So there were just handguns all over the place. Is that just an obscene, crazy dream, or wait, that actually might make sense?
well, it's weird and crazy. It's not going to happen. But I mean,
Have you
I
ever read about
understand
it,
the
or was that an
impulse
original
behind it,
idea of
which is
mine?
that if you did somehow manage to disperse weapons to every single Iranian or Persian in the major cities, um, how long would the regime stand up? And the answer is probably not very long.
So it's a great idea, huh?
I don't know about great idea because I'm not sure about the practicality of it.
Well, I think we can do that. Of course, we can do that. It's just parachutes. It's just
Well, the other thing that's often difficult is that no regime wants to be considered illegitimate it, from the get-go by saying we were installed by the Israelis. There's probably still, even among um, Iranians who aren't sympathetic to the regime, they still probably wouldn't want to claim to be the government that Israel installed.
yeah. But how would that happen? Because we're basically just fulfilling Trump's promise.
Well, no matter who takes, if there was some kind of regime change now,
Yeah.
you know that the political opposition would immediately charge that whichever government took over was a tool of the Israelis. I think you should
Huh.
anticipate
Yeah,
that.
well, you're giving a different point than my point, but okay, we do need to move on. Sorry to interrupt you, Jeff. You've just got to weigh in if you're going to weigh in, or otherwise pass. And then Sandon, you get one of the last bites of the apple. Jeff, you're up.
Yeah, I'd echo the point that you guys were talking about that, the dealing with their nuclear material is a game of whack-a-mole that you can't ever win that, but I think you can make it so expensive for them to be able to create fissionable material that they could put into a bomb. I have a continuing concern that they do have right now the ability to make dirty bombs, and those, although they don't do as much destruction, they create every bit as much problem for whoever it's dropped on or whoever it is
Well,
exploding.
and fear, terror, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing it's not really a question, but I'd be interested in your thoughts. John, I took exception to something you said about, all those thousands of smart people that are still in the government and, still functioning and can right the ship after the Trump administration's gone. That's one of my main concerns is that the senior executive service, which I believed was going to be in place, has been gutted. It's been gutted not only by people, taking retirement and going to Tahiti, but also that they don't believe they have job security the way that they used to. And it's, to me, it's a symptom of the unitary executive theory that, the president gets to have everybody in the administrative branch be somebody who's a sycophant to them. And you then don't have people that are the quote deep state anymore that know how things are supposed to work and can be the damping force for administration to administration.
So I like this question and conversation. I think we need to be having this question more among millions of Americans. So, Professor, give some guidance to citizens who want to think about the power of the executive and our own dangers internally about authoritarianism and whether we're representing a faction of the country through an individual unitary or whether the country is being represented. Or answer Jeff's comment.
I don't think it's a result of the unitary executive theory because the president has always had these powers. It's just that we haven't had this president. Um, so it's always been possible for for presidents to make bad decisions and have wide latitude in foreign policy. But there, I mean, the only thing I would slightly agree with you on is that the advice and consent piece from the Senate and the pushback from Congress could certainly be much more aggressive. Because while I agree, I mean, the, I don't know what it's a strange debate to have, but the Constitution does say all executive function is vested in the executive branch. So in that sense, I believe in if that's what the unitary executive theory is, I believe in that. But by the same token, all legislative function lies within Congress. So I don't think this is a function of the unitary executive theory so much as it is a function of Congress not taking its role seriously, the House taking its role seriously in terms of funding, and the advice and consent role of the Senate. So I just don't see that it's a problem. It's
I
a
concur
problem
with that,
because we
Professor.
have this particular president
Yeah.
with this particular Congress.
Yeah, I concur with that. So, Jeff, give a retort back.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that.
Ah,
Congress has done a lot. They've passed a lot of laws trying to insulate people from a changing executive. And the Supreme Court right now is agreeing that the unitary executive theory means that Congress can't do that. Maybe it's a flaw in the Constitution, but to me, there is real value in a government that has some stability and doesn't swing from side to side every time we get a new president. And that damping function is provided by all those federal employees who know how to do their job and know that they're going to survive their job through this whatever administration it is into the next one.
I think I disagree with you, Professor.
Well, I was just say for good or for ill. I think one of the an example of this would be that Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford wanted to try to manage the end of the Vietnam War, and Congress cut off all funding, meaning that the United States could not keep its obligations to South Vietnam. So Congress has in the past asserted its authority, and I think I disagreed. Well, I mean, I was two, but I can't say I disagreed. But retrospectively, I disagreed with it. But the I just don't know that it's a those tensions between Congress and the president have always been worked out by the Supreme Court and gone back and forth. And I don't see this particular Supreme Court as doing anything unique in this regard, in that they are, in some ways, limiting the executive branch more than any previous court in some areas, while granting fairly traditional um, um, executive functions in foreign policy. So I don't see them tipping the scales towards executive power
Okay,
so much as ratifying what the past practice has always been.
Professor, I agree with you again, and I think there is a real difference between you and Jeff on that. Bart, are you still with us?
I don't know if he could break the tie.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's going to be.
I am still with you. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you and Jeff agree and disagree with Professor Tootle and I. Is my guess correct?
Where are you? Do you think you're actually disagreeing right now?
Yeah. So, in layman's terms, I think the system is working. It's not pretty. It's not great. We got a weirdo weirdo is not a great way to describe a president, but I don't know.
Atypical.
Atypical is a good diplomatic term. Thank you. Atypical president and a Congress that's weak. Okay, we all agree on all that. I think all four of us agree on that. But the power of the president should be able to manage the whole executive. I mean, it's right there in the Constitution. And Jeff's saying that he's really nervous about that because a lot of decent, good people have left and retired and can't speak freely. I think that's okay. I want a strong executive. It's right there in the Constitution, and we need to act. Professor agrees with me. Jeff and you disagree. You're really scared about this unitary, strong
Well,
executive with the
I'm
condolences.
not I'm not scared about it. I think there is nothing in the Constitution that speaks to the so-called unitary executive argument that lawyers are making right now. I think that's not a thing. The Supreme Court has paid lip service to it. Actually, the most recent case where they talked about that, they completely went the other direction. And I think, Jeff, you'd probably agree with me on that. They basically kind of discredited the unitary executive. I don't know what they're going to do this time. The reality is, I think you can have a civil service system. I don't think it's unconstitutional to have a civil service system. And my problem as a lawyer with the unitary executive arguments that get made is they want to argue that you shouldn't have a civil service system. No one who works in a non-elected job should ever be protected from losing that job on the whim of the chief executive. And I think Congress has the power to provide that.
Well, Congress did with statutes, and the president's overriding those statutes
right.
with the concurrence of the courts.
Sometimes, yeah.
Mostly,
yes.
mostly he's controlling the federal government, and that concerns the hell out of Jeff, and it also concerns the heck out of you and Professor Tootle, and I don't care.
Well, I don't know if Stephen doesn't care. In fact, he just
yeah, I care. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Stephen cares. I think part of the problem with the way Trump, what people are not saying about how Trump is controlling things is what he is exercising is a power that he actually does have. Okay. And when I'm talking about unitary executive, the way people are making that argument is that, Donald Trump should be able to fire the entire Department of Homeland Security if he feels like it. What Trump is actually doing is he's playing around with the finances, the money. He's saying, the U.S. Department of Education, which incidentally, in parentheses, pretty much no longer exists anymore, because he has basically taken all their money away and diverted it to other things so that essentially he can lay off everybody in that department.
But Bart, you're right on the money, but he's also clearly implementing loyalty pledges in a variety of ways.
Yes, and I think that is unconstitutional. I think that violates the First Amendment, to be very honest. Okay. I think that's a bigger issue than universal, than just this unitary executive theory.
Jump back in, Jeff, and we got to finish this out in just a couple minutes. Then we'll get a reaction from Professor Tootle.
If there's any place where I'm the most concerned, it's the Department of Justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. I'm right there with you.
Agreed. Professor?
I think he's destroyed that department.
Yeah. And if you want, is this the wrap up portion of the show?
Not yet. I just wanted to look like we all agree.
Because there is something that Theodore Roosevelt said that I think sums up my position, which I'll update the language so that it's more modern. But he said, after being in politics for decades, what we need better people, we need better laws, and we need better administration of the laws. And by far, the first is the most important.
The character thing.
Mm-hmm.
That there is no regulation so perfectly written that it can account for a bad person with bad intent. So, we tend to look at these regulations and say, how can we make these regulations better? When the answer is, if you've got somebody who's trying to do the wrong thing, no law or regulation is perfect enough. Whereas if somebody is a good, smart person with good intent, I mean, the best boss I ever had, when I worked at a drugstore, shout out to Long's Drugs, where I worked for 9 years. Well, the whole time I was in college. And I had a really wonderful manager. And I once asked him, I said, you're the best boss I ever had. What's your secret? And he said, I hire good people, then I leave them alone. He said, everybody thinks I do things.
Mhm.
I don't. He said, I just hire good people and then I just leave them alone. And I ask them what I can do to be, how can I get out of your way? How can I, how can I make it easier for you to be great at your job here? You
Yeah,
know,
my best boss in the Army, exact same scenario. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
And another thing, Stephen, along the lines of what you're talking about, I was in state government here in Colorado forever. And I know a lot of people who have been in the federal government. The tools that a president of the United States has at his disposal, or hers, if we ever get a woman, um, to fire someone in the protected service, those tools are ginormous.
yeah,
You don't need the
right.
unitary executive theory for the president to decide that he doesn't want someone to work in a certain job anymore. Pretty much all you got to do is make it very clear to the head of the agency that they need to do something with that person. And that person is either gone, they're either fired, or they're moved to something where they're just not doing that anymore. And I've seen that happen on the state level here in Colorado over and over again. I've seen every governor that I was ever, I don't know, in state government. I was in the legislative branch, so I never was actually under the governor of Colorado. But the reality is, I've seen the governor just kind of decide, okay, we can't have this going on anymore.
Yeah,
John Smith, you're no longer doing that. You're now doing something that you don't want to do. You
right.
can leave if you want,
Yeah,
but the reality is the president of the United States, that power is so much stronger. In fact, if you're in the protected service in an agency, you don't want the president to know who you are.
yeah,
Right.
Because as soon as they know who you are, they can
So,
target you.
But
You want to
that
dive
dynamic,
in there and just do your job.
yeah,
And
and Jeff,
that
I got you, Bart. We got to start wrapping up.
yeah. Go. I'm
that
sorry. I took
dynamic
us on a
is
tangent.
that dynamic is true in corporations as well. And thinking it through, it should be that way. And so what I've realized is that we have culturally relied upon the discretion of an executive not to do really partisan things that we all as voters shouldn't like. I mean, remember the outrage when Bush fired all the U.S. attorneys, one of whom I know personally. And now you see that in, an order of magnitude greater, and nobody seems to object. So I don't know what the right answer is. It isn't to pass a regulation that says he can't do it. The answer is voters need to have a problem with what this kind of thing happening, and
And it
evidently
goes back to
they don't.
culture of the character and culture
Yeah.
that Professor Tootle keeps alluding back to.
yeah.
Mhm.
And by the way, civic education. Let's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
forget that you're asking him to know. The average person doesn't know what a U.S. attorney is.
Mhm.
Right.
I mean, how are they supposed to have some sort of an informed opinion about it? Like, they don't even know what it is.
So, and yeah, I'm not just talking about the characters of the people that are involved. I'm also talking about the American citizenry, which is what you're concluding with, that we need to do a better job with all of that. So, thank you. So, there was a theme to this, by the way, and I didn't do a great job getting back to the machine that puts all the threads together. Um, so, I'm just going to conclude with this that you're not going to like. Um, Next Saturday, not tomorrow, but next Saturday, there will be, I don't know, 3 million, 5 million, 7 million. I don't know how many people, but millions of Americans are going to be protesting a new No Kings protest against our king, or lack thereof, our president of the United States. So we want, well, we don't, you keep going back to your ideals and interests. And so we don't want authoritarians around the world, or actually, we don't care if they don't have an interest. But we don't want authoritarians here either, right, Professor?
Right?
Except we're willing to have you be a presidential authoritarian within your administration. Yeah, that's okay. You're willing to be an authoritarian in your role prescribed in the Constitution. A-okay. start going outside that role. Nope, sorry, we don't like that.
Or how about this?
Thanks.
Throw out some reform ideas because I, I'm certainly open to certainly reforming the pardon power. I'm open to some legislation that I don't know
That would be a
that would
constitutional.
begin limiting, I don't know, some of these principles or at least clarifying them. Like, let's have this conversation, but it's something that has to happen in a conversation between the legislature and the judicial branches and the executive branches. But none of these things have any kind of a final solution. They're all things that we just have to keep working through year after year.
Mhm.
Because you solve, it's everything is a game of whack-a-mole. Uh, no human being has a universal knowledge. We need to trust that in our fundamental institutions that we are actually going to get the best result out of these conversations and arguments between different constituencies that have themselves felt through the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branches.
It's an ongoing
And at every level of government,
responsibility,
between
and at every
cities and
level.
counties and states, and
Yep.
between the three branches of the federal government, that we will get the best possible result out of this.
Yeah, and that should just make you have a peaceful, easy feeling, right, Jeff? Things are good in America, right? You won't even respond to that. I thought that was good. Okay, Jeff. Any one last liners, Bart, Jeff, or Professor? I didn't weave this thread strong enough on what Americans need to be doing against Iran and China and Russia and North Korea. And for
Well,
that,
we only have one president at a time.
and so we just got to be patient
Yeah.
and do our work as citizens. We got to.
Or, if you think this president is terrible, then you need to remove him and make JD Vance the president of the United States.
Or next November, put a stronger check in
Right.
Congress.
I mean, I'm only saying that
I
because
know.
I
I
want
know.
to warn people against this idea that impeaching and removing Trump from office will.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the impeaching. I think that the Congress, though, will change, and that's a good thing. If we want a stronger Congress checking the executive, we may not like their crazy ideas, but there's still a Senate that probably won't change enough to really matter. So then we're going to have status quo for 2 years. Uh,
I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty cynical about what the Democrats would do in office. I don't get the impression that they have a coherent, you know, system of reform they're actually trying to unleash so much as they are going to be reactionaries in exactly the same way as Trump, just in the other direction.
that's probably correct. Do you agree, Jeff and Bart? We're finishing with your comments.
That's too depressing. Can we finish with some?
Yeah, okay. That's true.
Like,
Okay. All right, I'm skipping their
do we all
comments.
expect doom?
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so the professor finished with what you started with, that the two main principles of America.
Well, in American foreign policy, that should be based on unilateral. I mean, I would say traditionally, before Wilson messed it up and before the big events of World War II altered these things, that we're made to run on unilateralism and American exceptionalism out of a combination of ideals and interests.
Yeah, and we've got to serve as an example that we can govern ourselves.
Yeah, that's what we
Mhm.
mean by American exceptionalism.
All right. Sure appreciate your
Mhm.
time. All right, Professor Jeff, Bart, thank you. Have a great weekend,
Good to
and
see you guys.
hope to see you next Friday.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank y'all.